Ever pondered how a family of 70 could burgeon into a nation of millions within a few centuries? How did 600,000 men depart Egypt with Moses during the Exodus? This isn't just a casual curiosity, it's an enigma that has intrigued scholars, historians and believers for centuries. The book of Genesis, chapter 46, verse 27, tells us that Jacob and his family, numbering 70 in all, moved to Egypt. Fast forward a few centuries to the book of Exodus, chapter 1, verses 5 to 7, where we learn that the descendants of Jacob, now known as the Israelites, were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. But how did this exponential growth happen? And how did it lead to the Exodus, where, as stated in Exodus chapter 12, verses 37 to 38, 600,000 men, not counting women and children, along with a mixed multitude, left Egypt with Moses? These numbers are staggering, almost inconceivable. And yet they are recorded in the sacred texts that many hold dear. So how do we reconcile the seeming improbability with the biblical narrative? Is it a matter of faith alone, or are there logical, demographic factors that could explain this rapid population growth? And what does archaeology have to say about it all? Are there tangible traces left behind that corroborate the biblical account, or does the evidence point to a different interpretation altogether? All these questions and more will be explored as we delve into the Exodus Enigma. We'll examine the biblical verses, dig into the demographic factors that could have contributed to the population explosion, and sift through the archaeological evidence that could shed light on this fascinating question. So, are you ready for an intellectual adventure? Join us as we delve into the biblical verses, archaeological evidence, and demographic factors that shed light on this fascinating question. Firstly, let's examine the biblical accounts. What do the scriptures say about the Exodus and the number of Israelites? Genesis 46, verse 27 notes, "With the two sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the members of Jacob's family which went to Egypt were 70 in all." This verse provides us with the starting point. Jacob and his descendants, totaling 70 individuals, journeyed to Egypt. Fast forward to Exodus 1, verses 5 to 7. Here we find the descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. This passage highlights the explosive growth of the Israelite population in Egypt over time. Finally, Exodus 12, verses 37 to 38 states, "The Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Sukkoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot besides women and children. Many other people went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds." From this we gather that the Exodus involved 600,000 men, excluding women, children, and a multitude of other individuals who were not direct descendants of Jacob. These verses lay down the numerical foundation for our discussion. 70 members of Jacob's family went to Egypt. Over time they multiplied greatly, becoming exceedingly numerous. When the Exodus occurred, 600,000 Israelite men, not including women, children and others, journeyed from Egypt. In essence, the scriptures illustrate a remarkable population growth from a family of 70 to a nation of hundreds of thousands in a few hundred years. The numbers may seem staggering at first glance, but when we delve into the world of demographics, population growth and consider the divine factor, the pieces of the puzzle may just fit together. The scriptures provide us with a number, but how does this translate to the actual population? Let's explore. Population growth is a complex phenomenon. What factors could have contributed to the Israelites' explosive growth in Egypt? Let's delve into the demographic factors that could have spurred the rapid population growth of the Israelites in Egypt. It all starts with Jacob, the patriarch of the Israelites, who, along with his family, moved to Egypt. The Bible mentions that 70 members of Jacob's household made this journey. But remember, this figure likely included only the direct descendants of Jacob. Now consider the broader household. In ancient times, a household often included servants, extended family, and others who were associated with the family, but not necessarily related by blood. So the number of people who actually went to Egypt with Jacob was likely much larger than 70. Once in Egypt, the Israelites lived and prospered, giving birth to new generations. The Bible describes the Israelites as being fruitful, multiplying greatly, and becoming exceedingly numerous. In a society where large families were common and children were seen as a blessing, it's plausible that the population could have grown rapidly in a few centuries. Moreover, the demographic growth of the Israelites was likely bolstered by the favorable conditions in Egypt. They were settled in the land of Goshen, an area known for its fertile soil and ample resources. With abundant food and a stable environment, the conditions were ripe for a population boom, but there's more. The Bible also mentions that God blessed the Israelites and made them increase greatly. This divine factor, while not quantifiable, is a key part of the biblical narrative and cannot be overlooked when considering the Israelites' growth. So, when we consider the initial number of people who went to Egypt with Jacob, the birth of new descendants in Egypt, the inclusion of servants and members of the wider household, the favorable conditions in Goshen and God's blessings, the rapid growth of the Israelites' population becomes a plausible scenario. The numbers begin to make sense when we take into account these factors. But what about physical evidence? Archaeology provides tangible proof of the past. What archaeological evidence supports the biblical account of the Exodus? The world of archaeology holds a treasure trove of evidence that brings the past to life. But how does this evidence tie into the biblical account of the Exodus? Let's explore. Recent archaeological finds have emerged that lend credibility to the Exodus account. These pieces of the puzzle, while not definitive, certainly add intriguing layers to the story. For instance, the discovery of an ancient Egyptian papyrus called the Ipuwer papyrus. This document describes a series of calamities striking Egypt, some of which strikingly parallel the biblical plagues that preceded the Exodus. Then we have the findings at the ancient city of Avaris in the Nile Delta. The archaeological excavations there have revealed a large Semitic population in Egypt around the time of the Exodus. This population suddenly disappeared, which could potentially correlate with the mass departure of the Israelites. Furthermore, researchers have found that the route described in the Bible, leading from Egypt through the Sinai Peninsula and on to Canaan, is dotted with ancient Egyptian forts. Could these have been the same forts the Israelites encountered on their journey? And let's not forget the Meneptah stele, an inscription by Pharaoh Meneptah, the son of Ramesses II. This stele mentions Israel as a people, not a place, indicating that the Israelites were recognized as a significant group during that era. Each of these discoveries adds a piece to the historical puzzle. While none of them provide unequivocal proof of the Exodus, they do contribute to a growing body of evidence that aligns with the biblical narrative. But archaeological evidence, like any form of evidence, must be interpreted. And interpretations can vary, often reflecting the biases and assumptions of those doing the interpreting. What one person sees as compelling proof, another might dismiss as mere coincidence. The archaeological evidence lends weight to the Bible's account, but what does this all mean for our understanding of the Exodus? We've journeyed through scriptures, demographic factors, and archaeological finds. What conclusions can we draw about the Exodus and the population growth of the Israelites? As we've seen, the Bible's account of the Exodus is far more than just a tale. It's a complex narrative of faith, endurance, and divine intervention, intricately woven with historical and demographic details that stand up to scrutiny. The biblical story of some 600,000 men leaving Egypt with Moses is not merely plausible, but probable when we consider the multitude of factors at play. Let's revisit the journey we've undertaken. We've delved into the scriptures, scrutinizing the verses that tell us of the Israelites' time in Egypt. They paint a vivid picture of a people who multiplied from a family of 70 to a nation of millions, all within a few centuries. Our exploration of demographic factors added further weight to this narrative. We considered the number of people who initially went to Egypt with Jacob, the inclusion of servants and members of the wider household, the birth of new descendants in Egypt, and the favorable conditions for population growth. All these elements combined make the rapid multiplication of the Israelites not just a possibility, but a likelihood. And let's not forget the archaeological evidence that we unearthed. Recent discoveries have added a layer of credibility to the scriptural account, further solidifying the plausibility of the Exodus. But above all, we must remember the divine hand that was at work. The scriptures tell us of God's blessings upon the Israelites, his promise to make them a great nation. This divine factor, coupled with the demographic and archaeological evidence, makes the Exodus story compelling and credible. As we see, the Exodus, a cornerstone of biblical history, stands robust under scrutiny. The word of God indeed holds true.